I woke up and God told me, I want you to email your boss and ask for a meeting because you're going to quit tomorrow. Hey guys, I'm Jalene Cook, and today I want to share with you a testimony about when God spoke to me to move from New York City back to LA. When I lived in New York City, I thought, this is where I'm going to live, this is where I'm going to die, this is where I'm going to raise my family. I had no plans on ever moving back to LA. My roommate came up to me one day and said, hey, I just wanted to let you know I'm not going to sign the lease for, next year because I'm going to move to Brooklyn. And my mouth said, as if it was literally disconnected from my body, oh, that's okay, I'm moving to LA. I was like, what? Why did I say that? I literally was awestruck of like, who just said that? Why did I say that? I'm not moving to LA. And then I thought, am I supposed to move to LA? As I was holding this thought, I got a text from my mom, I got a text from my brother, and I had sent to them like, hey, I'm kind of thinking about moving to LA. And both of them said, God already told me you're moving to LA. I've just been waiting for God to tell you. And I was like, what? So I had this crazy understanding of, okay, I'm supposed to move to LA, but when? But God didn't tell me when. But instead, God said, you need to start packing. So I started packing. I started putting my things in boxes. I started, not signing my lease. I started talking to my friends, preparing them that I was going to move to LA, but I didn't have a date for when I was going. I remember so distinctly my mom getting pretty frustrated, being like, occasionally, but like, when are you coming? Like, what date are you coming home? And I was kind of like, I don't know. I feel like it might be in July or June, but I really don't have an idea. Like, I'm just going to wait until God tells me to move. And it was this really uncomfortable sensation, though really exciting, where God was very clear I was going to LA. He was very clear that I needed to pack, and he was clear that I needed to wait on him, and then he would tell me when. So all my things were packed. I put all my things into literally a moving truck that was, going off to LA, and my friends were okay for me to like sleep on their couch a little bit, live out of a suitcase until I was ready to go. One day in the middle of the night, I was still working as a Pilates instructor, and I woke up and God told me, I want you to email your boss and ask for a meeting because you're going to quit tomorrow. And I was like, okay. When I go to take the meeting, my boss says, oh, I'm so sorry. I need to finish up this phone call. Would you mind sitting in the waiting room just a little bit longer? I was like, okay. I go into the waiting room. The moment I sit down, I get a phone call. And on this phone call, I can't remember if it was my brother. I think it was my brother who called me. And he's like, hey, Jalene, I don't want to alarm you, but mom just had a stroke and we're at the hospital. And immediately my mind goes numb. My mom had never had a stroke before. This was very abrupt. This was very crazy. I'm just hysterically crying. And my immediate reaction is, oh my gosh, I have to go home. I have to be with my mom. I have to move. I have to leave. And so I sit down with my boss, because now she calls me in, and she's like, oh, what's going on? What did you want to have a meeting about? And I was like, well, my mom just had a stroke, and so I have to go home. I have to quit. And she's like, oh, when did your mom have a stroke? And I was like, oh, they literally called right now. And she's sitting there like, but you emailed me last night saying you wanted a meeting, but you wanted to have a meeting because you're moving to LA because your mom had a stroke. And of course the timeline didn't make sense to someone on the outside, but God had prepared my heart ahead of time of, you're going to have this meeting with this boss, you're going to quit. But he didn't tell me, hey, it's because your mom was going to have a stroke. And I think that's an important part of the testimony, because I think God only shares with us enough information as we're ready, and then he cares for us step by step as we receive that. What I was so thankful about in that moment was, as I'm processing, okay, my mom had a stroke, I'm really scared, I have to get home. I now don't have to pack up all my stuff. I don't have to go say goodbye to all of my friends. I already did it. I don't have to hire a moving van. I don't have to get my lease signed by someone else or anything. Everything was taken care of, that by the time I heard this news, All I had to do was process it, lean on God and my friends, and then book a flight. So I heard this news and my reaction was, I have to move home. And I knew that this was the moment God was preparing me for. I knew this was going to be the reason and the moment that I was going to move to LA. The other thing that was in the background during this time is I had this weird sense in my heart that my husband lived in LA and he didn't live in New York. I wasn't married at the time. My future husband, I felt like, lived in LA. And it was around this same time, within a year or so, that my future husband, Patrick, did move to LA. And so not only did God bring me to LA to be with my mom, who fully recovered, by the way, she's incredible, had a miraculous recovery where she couldn't use one side of her body, one side of her brain, couldn't speak. Within a month, everything went back to normal and she was off doing a missions trip. So God supernaturally quickened her healing, which was crazy. I was back in LA, and it was during this season of being in LA that I started going, do I actually want to do dance? Do I want to do musical theater and acting? Like, what is it that I want to be doing? And it was during this first year back that God actually repurposed my heart, shifted my dreams, and called me into ministry. And I remember that first morning back, I came back to LA, and God had said this to me when I first moved to New York. God said, I'm going to change your dreams. And when I was moving to New York, I thought, okay, why, what? I'm literally moving to New York. What do you mean you're changing my dreams? And that was all God said. He was like, and then when I moved to LA, God said, okay, I let you have your time in New York. Remember, I said I was going to change your dreams. This is the time. And it was during that year that then God called me into ministry and changed my heart from wanting, to be on Broadway and be a professional dancer, to then wanting to love and serve people and share the gospel through worship and vocational ministry. And sometimes I wonder, man, what would have happened if I wasn't obedient to God saying, it's time to go to LA, follow this order, and walk out everything that happened? Where would I be? But God always prepares us for what he's calling us into. And to clarify, I don't think that God gave my mom a stroke. I don't think God was like, let me give her a stroke in order to give Jolene a sign that she needed to move to LA. No. We know that God doesn't kill, steal, or destroy. But we do know what the Bible says about who does do that, and it's the enemy. The enemy kills, steals, and destroys. So let's keep it consistent that if my mom's mind was getting destroyed in that moment, or her heart wasn't working, whatever was happening, God wasn't doing that to her. And yet, in this happening and God knowing that was going to happen, he was still able to speak to me about the plans he had for me in the midst of something really terrible. Because God doesn't make terrible things happen, and yet they're not outside of him where he can't use those things to also bring about good and bring about his will in the midst of suffering. He's not creating the suffering, but he can use suffering for his purposes. And so right now, I don't know if there's something that God's calling you to do, a big move, calling you to quit, calling you to take an act of faith. But I want to encourage you that if you feel that stirring, keep pulling on God's heart, keep praying, keep asking, and trust that God is going to lay the steps out before you as you walk in faith and as you walk in obedience. I hope that encouraged you today, and I will see you next time. All right, bye.